Oh, I'm sorry. I told you. I told you I had a 1 chance in 5 of blowing it, and I totally rolled a 5. I'm Mike Shea from Sly Flourish.
And I'm your co-host, Austin.
And I'm your co-host, Ian.
And we are here to help inspire you with creative content that you can bring to your next adventure. I get that one?
All right.
Got it.
All right. Is that me again? Yeah, yep, that's right. And your roles are like spending too much time on content that won't benefit your game.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sure, we all have.
It's my first time. Cut me some slack.
Kind of issue.
Uh-oh.
How dare you?
Oh, at least we know the issue.
Well, that making any sense because. All right. Austin, you got
I
this
guess
one?
that's me. Yeah. Hey guys, gift to give away. Cool. Thanks to Loresmith for giving us the modular dungeon tile sets to give away. Specifically this time, the Arcania set. Now, the Arcania digital tile set lets you make dark, shadowy dungeon maps rich with the fumes of arcane secrets. On one hand, in one wall of this dungeon, maybe you won't find anything because apparently the DM wasn't very thorough with his planning. On the other hand, maybe you might find a finished product of our show that goes great. If you find it, please let me know.
Who's our winner today?
Our winner today is Christopher Cooper, 3000. Congratulations, buddy.
Hey,
I figured it out. We're good now.
Okay.
Of course, we have a big guest, and I have a screw up. All right, so
I'm the one that blew like the very first line. So.
It's okay.
You got nothing to worry about.
I'm really congratulations on your product. If you didn't win, have no fear. You can head on over to critacademy.com/Loresmith and get all kinds of free fat loots, compliments of Chris from Loresmith. I'm really excited for our show today. We are going to be joined by the legendary Mike. Is it Shea?
Yeah, Mike Shea. Yep,
Mike Shea, a.k.a. Sly Flourish, which honestly, I'm trying my damnedest not to fanboy over right now. We are going to be discussing The Lazy Dungeon Master and the sequel, right? The Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. So, Mike, for people who aren't fanboys such as myself, can you tell us a little? Yeah, right. Most people. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do in the world of Dungeons and Dragons?
Sure. So all I do of note is do stuff for Dungeons and Dragons. So there's nothing else really worth talking about. Except my husband and my wife is probably above me. But next in line is.
Gotta throw that in there a little bit.
Yeah, that's important. So yeah, I started writing about D&D. So I've been playing D&D forever, and I started writing about D&D in the early. I think it was 2008. 2008. That sounds about right. So about 12 years ago. When they were just transitioning to 4th edition, and blogging had been a thing for a while. Twitter was pretty much brand new, and the idea of sort of live blogging things was totally new. And I got kind of lucky by live blogging some of the 4th edition release stuff, and that brought attention that I liked. And I was like, I could actually write a more formal blog about this, and I'll focus it on Dungeon Master stuff, and I'll focus it on 4th edition D&D. And I'll write tips and tricks for DMs to be able to run better games for 4th edition D&D. Right. And there weren't, D&D in 4th edition had far fewer people playing it and kind of interested in it than 5th edition does now. And we had kind of a small community of about 10 or 12 bloggers that all kind of knew each other, and we all met at conventions, and we all talked all the time, and we were always sharing each other's posts and stuff like that. And that worked really well. And then about 2 or 3 years into I guess it'd be 2 years into that, I said, let me try writing a short book. And I wrote a book called Dungeon Master Tips. And that went fine and people liked it. And then I wrote another one called Running Epic Tier Games. That was fine. And then I wrote The Lazy Dungeon Master. And that was right at the transition from 4th edition to 5th edition. It was during the D&D Next playtest, if you remember that.
Yep.
And it was the first time I was starting to see like the how D&D was changing between this very heavy grid-based tactical combat game to more of the sort of wild and wacky stories that happen when the rules are lightened up a little bit and loosened up a little bit.
Right.
And the example was during one of the initial play tests. It was at Winter Fantasy, which they're actually having the virtual Winter Fantasies coming up like in 3 weeks here. Winter Fantasy happens in February. It happens in Indiana. And back then, I don't remember what the year was, but I think it was the first public play test of D&D Next. And I sat down at the table and we're all sitting there looking, and the DM comes up and it's Monty Cook, right? So Monty Cook of Monty Cook Games was one of the advisors for D&D Next back then. I think he actually left Wizard. He was a contractor for them, and I think he left as a contractor for them while it was still being developed. But he was running it, and we were playing Caves of Chaos, which is the Keep of the Borderlands, the major sort of Keep of the Borderlands thing.
Story arc, right?
Yeah, and I remember that everybody was talking about the stories that were happening at the different tables, and it was like, well, in ours we got killed by an ogre, and in ours we actually helped get the goblins and kobolds together and had a wedding between the two of them. And, and every story was wildly different. And probably the most interesting ones had nothing to do with killing anything. It was all about how they sort of worked the factions off of one another. And a lot of that happened because the rules were a lot lighter than, and there wasn't this expectation of like, well, there's going to be these 1.5 hour long fights that you typically saw in 4th edition. So, so obviously I transitioned my writing. I actually have played lots of other RPGs and written about other RPGs, but I kind of moved the whole site over to 5th edition when 5th edition came out, and wrote back about 3 years ago. I said, I'm going to go back and hit the concepts of the Lazy Dungeon Master again. I took on a month off from my day job, and I just read every book about it I could. I ran tons of polls. I talked to, over the period of not just that month, but for a long time, talked to many, many DMs, and refined this prep process that I have in Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master to try to define a process that is easy to do and helps DMs get the most out of their games by doing as little as they have to. Yeah. And so that's where Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master comes out. And that Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master is probably what I'm most known for. But I've written other adventures. I've written other books of adventures, including Fantastic Adventures, Ruins of the Grendel Route. I worked with James Winter-Casso and Scott Gray, both of whom are, I think we were talking on Friday, and we think that Scott Gray's name is in, I don't know how many dozens and dozens of hardcover Wizards of the Coast books, but lots and lots of them. He's a longtime editor for Wizards of the Coast, and James Winter-Casso has got about 6 different credits and published things. So we all worked together on a book called Fantastic Lairs, the digital version of Fantastic Lair. It was kickstarted last year, and the PDF of it just went out to the backers a couple weeks ago, and now we're working on the print-on-demand copies of that. So that should be out and available within the next month or so.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
All right, for our next question, if we somehow didn't cover it in that
sorry.
entry there.
I have no problem talking
no,
about it. That's another trait of Sly Flourish.
Yeah, it's good though.
Say your most memorable D&D moment.
Obviously the one playing with Monty Cook comes to mind, but that's probably not the, I probably, now I need another one, and I already said it. Most memorable D&D moment. So in the late 80s, I ran a Forgotten Realms campaign where Manshun was the main bad guy. Manshun is an evil wizard that back then was the ruler of the Zhentarim. If you're familiar with your Forgotten Realms lore, the Zhentarim is now they're like a bunch of gangsters, but back then they were the big bad, right? They were like, they were the Nazis of Forgotten Realms, and Manshun was like the Hitler. So the group had been hunting down Zhentarim for a long time, and they got to Zintel Keep, the capital, like Berlin, and they infiltrated his tower, and they're facing off. And I had totally like Monty Hall'd the characters. They had every awesome weapon they could. And he's a 20th level wizard, and they're beating the hell out of him. And he looks at him, and he takes his fully charged Staff of the Magi, and he breaks it in half, and it blew up the whole tower. It killed. I think we rolled the die to see do they get teleported to another plane of existence, or are they all killed?
That is dope.
And we rolled, and they went to another plane, and they showed up in hell. And one of them fell and hit a tree for some tremendous amount of damage. So he fell out of the sky and got ripped in half by landing on a tree.
Oh my god!
And the player was just like screaming, like "Wow!" And so it was a really I think back on it and I'm like, I had no idea what I was doing. No, none of us did. But that story sticks with me, practically 30 years later.
I think
it's just a really fun moment.
I think that first of all, holy shit, that's awesome. That actually segues really good into the next question. That we really like is we all go through that experience because you got to start somewhere. And I like to think that I'm not the only person in the world that's made mistakes. Do you believe that there's a moment where you have failed as a DM or player, maybe even in that situation, and what were you able to learn and take from it?
Sure. So my failure as a DM, well, I'm gonna hedge. But there's an adventure that I ran for my home group. Probably about a year ago at this time, maybe a little bit more than a year ago. And it was probably the least fun session that we had.
Oh no.
And it was really they were going, and I'll explain why, and I'll explain why I actually don't think it was my fault, but which is right. But it gets better. So I don't have a problem admitting mistakes, but I'm pretty sure this wasn't mine. My problem was running it the way it was. And it's essentially a death trap dungeon where you're just facing trap after trap after trap. And they're not particularly interesting traps like you find in White Plume Mountain or even Tomb of Horrors. They were just pit traps and crossbow traps and stuff like that. And meanwhile, while they're climbing through this helly, this terrible, windy path, they're also getting attacked by specters who can fly through the walls. So the dungeon is really tight and maze-like, and you're getting shot by traps, and specters are coming out and hitting you. And there wasn't any good thing in this place. There wasn't anything they didn't really even want to be there that day. They really were why are we going through this thing? And we're just getting life drained and shot, and this sucks. And then you'd open a room, and it was a very 4th edition style. Here's your three brutes and 2 artillery. You fight them and they beat them, and then they have to go to the next room and get the next MacGuffin that lets them in the next section. And I remember the funny bit was I actually built it out with a whole tabletop sized Dwarven Forge setup. So it was really ornate, right? And we laughed because one of my friends, inexpensive, and one of my friends always complains that when he doesn't show up, that's the night I pull out all the Dwarven Forge stuff, right? And he couldn't be there that night. So I took a picture of 3 of my friends my wife and 2 of my friends, looking at the Dwarven Forge thing, going with their hands on their heads, this is the best thing they've ever seen, right? And they're pointing at it and gesturing. And I took that picture so I could send it to him to grief him for the fact that he couldn't be there. And the reality was it was the worst game I had run in years. And the Dwarven Forge didn't matter at all. It did not help at all because it was so lame. So then the real mistake is I then ran the same adventure again for my other group that I have on Sundays. And it sucked just as bad there as it did the time I ran it. And at that point I said, okay, it's not me. It's this adventure. This adventure sucks, right? And now I use it as an example of what does a bad adventure look like? And what does a bad dungeon, in particular, what does a bad map and dungeon look like? And it comes from an adventure, and anybody who's heard me talk about this, I talk about it all the time. It comes from Isle of the Abbey in Ghost of Saltmarsh. Okay. So Ghost of Saltmarsh has 8 adventures in it, and most of them are awesome. That one, if you look at the map is just a poorly designed map, in many, many ways. It has if you're familiar with the idea of Jaquaying the dungeon. You ever hear this term of Jaquaying the dungeon?
Yeah.
Janelle Jaquay, Janelle Jaquay is a designer for tournament adventures back in the 80s. And she has this model for dungeon design that's really, really good. This one was the opposite of that. This one, it's there's one entrance. It only goes into one room. That room has 10 rooms with doorways right next to it, which means if you do anything in that one room, all of the other doors are going to open. All the guys are going to pour out, and you're going to have to fight them all, right? Which is just, no one wants to run that. And then if you look at the dungeon itself, it's this single windy path that arcs around, and it's just filled with traps. It's terrible. So my biggest mistake was not just running it and not really modifying it, but also running it again to confirm that it stuck. Yeah. And then proving that it did in fact suck.
I do think
you had to affirm it.
Right. I do think that's cool because everyone always wants to blame the dungeon master, but there's cases where things are just designed poorly.
I still blame the dungeon master.
Okay.
You know, that is true. But like the thing that it taught me is like, can you now look at it and recognize a badly designed adventure and recognize it early so that you can then tweak it to make it good.
Right.
Yeah. And there were parts of that adventure that I also still hated, and I did tweak them and made it better. So, but that Death Trap dungeon was not one of them. That was a mistake.
Wonderful.
That definitely reminds me of a few dungeons I had to run for Adventure League here and there. I'm like, they want to do what, where, when?
Yeah, right. I think
Makes
I've written one
sense.
of those. Yeah, I have an adventure out there that is not well loved, and gets its fair bit of complaints. So I'm with you.
Well, luckily that's not the one we're here to talk about,
probably
right?
well deserved.
No.
What are we here to
But
talk
you know
about?
what we are here to talk about, though, is obviously your Lazy Dungeon Master's book. What can you tell us about it, and who is it for?
So yes, I have two books: the original Lazy Dungeon Master book and Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, and both of them have the same goal, which is helping DMs get the most out of their game prep, and by doing less. Get the most out of their game by doing as little prep as they possibly can. And it's not it's not zero. Like you can't not do any. Well, I mean, some do. There are some people who say, I never prep anything, and I sit down and I just roll with it, and it's great, and my players love it. And you're like, great, like you're the one.
That must be nice.
You're like
but a lot of us need something.
0.01%.
Yeah, and actually, I've done polls to see exactly how many people are doing that, and it is very low. But
I can't imagine it.
Yeah, right. You're right. I mean, it's happened. I've done it. Like every so often, we find ourselves in a situation where like, I'm gonna run a game, and it turns out like I can't run the game I thought I was gonna run. Now I gotta run this without any prep at all. Generally speaking, it seems like people need to do it, and I was thinking about it today, and like one of the major things is like it's not about having the perfect system. It's about having a system that works well enough that you can trust it, and that once you've done it, you feel good enough. You feel good to run the game. It's almost all about, do you feel confident in running the game? Because the game goes whatever direction it's going to go anyway. So it's just about, do I have enough stuff that I feel good going in, and then I'll roll with it while the game is happening. And so both books kind of focus on a heavy improv, a heavy improv style. Both of them kind of say these are the things that you want to have on hand, so when the game goes in weird directions, you're ready to fill them out. The first book had sort of three major steps. I can't even tell you exactly what they are. But it was like, can you do your whole game on like 3 index cards? And I think it even has a chapter on 5-minute prep, which is a little bit of a misnomer because it's really hard to prep in 5 minutes. But 30 minutes, I've definitely prepped games in 30 minutes and not had trouble. And I've talked to many people who have prepped games in 30 minutes and not had trouble. Generally, you're not prepping for 30 minutes. If you're also setting up a giant map inside Roll20, that's going to take you a bit longer than 30 minutes. But if you're able to, if you're going to improv a game and you don't have to worry too much about maps and minis and layout and setup and everything like that, you could, I think I've seen people, more than just me, who are able to kind of go through the steps and be ready to roll a game in 30 minutes. So both are kind of focused on that. But the second book has a more refined set of 8 steps that you can follow to sort of prep your game. And you don't have to use all 8 steps. There are definitely times where some of the steps are already done for you. Like if you're running a published module, you might only need 3 steps, because the published module is taken care of. It's got monsters and treasure and locations already set. And so you don't have to do those 3. But yeah, so and that has proven to be pretty useful. And one thing I do is every Sunday, I did it earlier today, I do a YouTube video where I go through the steps and I prep my own game, and everybody can see like, what does it look like to actually do it? That's why I did the series. And people are like, really cool. It's great that you wrote a book, but what does it actually look like? And I'm like, okay, let me show you. Right. And now I've done 200, I don't know if I've done 200 of those, but I've done a lot of them, more than 100 videos. And where people can then go and see it, and then bore the hell out of people, but whatever.
Yeah. In your book, you actually discuss, you have a quote from Robin D. Laws, how little can I possibly prepare and still have a satisfying and interesting game? Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the quote and the 5-minute adventure preparation?
Yeah.
Which I guess you kind of did already. But...
Yeah, but I can dive into that a little more. So, that quote, I think if in return, there are similar quotes from others, like Jeremy Crawford kind of said the same thing. Chris Perkins has said the same thing. A lot of popular DMs have talked about the fact that it's not just a matter of like saving time. My original hypothesis going in with both of these books was, how can we just spend a little less time and still get a good impact for our game. But in other cases, talking to a lot of people, a lot of surveys, they said their games got better. That it wasn't just a matter of being able to keep up with the same level of game that you were typically running. It was actually that when they prepped less, their game got better. And it's because they had to improv more, and it's because the game could shift in different directions, and DMs were more prepared for it. So I kind of doubled down on that hypothesis in Return a lot, and said, like, it's not just a matter of being able to do less work. It's about that the less work you do, the better it is, to a point, right? And it's that to a point is the important part, because there's still stuff you have to do. Yeah, the book talks about the stuff you need to do.
I think that's one of the
or some stuff,
the big things that separate so many different dungeon masters trying to learn is not everyone needs the exact same amount of time invested in a game to get a specific result. For me, when I was doing 4th edition, I did spend all the time doing all the elaborate maps and all the elaborate planning, and I would get I found myself getting frustrated when they would go a different direction.
Oh yeah.
And I ended up getting to the point where I tried to pigeonhole my players, which frustrated them because I was forcing them to go a direction, and frustrated me because I was forcing them to go a direction. And so I finally realized that when I prepare less in the case of the 5-minute prep, that I'm personally more free in allowing with the decisions that the players wanted to make. And because of that, that was more fun for them, because I wasn't getting upset that I was forced, they were going a different direction. I've told on the show many times about how there's a pillar of smoke going in one direction and the bastards went another one, and how angry I was. But ever since then, it's been, okay, they want to do what they want to do. So if I just put some bullet points of what's going to happen, or what I think is going to happen, that's less stressful if it doesn't happen.
Right.
And I think that's something I've learned a lot going through your books too.
Yeah. A common metaphor that I use these days is it's the difference between having a fully cooked and fully prepared meal delivered to the table and going to a hibachi grill where they bring all of the food out in little dishes and they're cooking it in front of you and they're flipping it around and they're flicking shrimps at you, and there's it's a big show, and it's like, if what we prep isn't the fully baked meal, but instead all the components that we're going to need to be ready to do it at the game, then the game can steer back and forth. And probably the best example I have of this is one of the steps is called Secrets and Clues. It was actually something I dug out of the Dark Souls games. Like I picked it up from Bloodborne. If anybody's familiar with Bloodborne, in Bloodborne you'll pick up an item in Bloodborne and it has a one-line story attached to it. And it teaches you just one thing about the lore. And you're like, I don't know what the hell's going on in this game, but I'm slowly piecing at least parts of it together by picking up these items and learning about these scriptures. Yeah. And so I love that. And I was like, I started doing this. I started keeping track of that. And I was like, this actually works better if I don't associate those clues to any particular object or NPC or location. And I just keep a list of clues. And then when they come up, I throw them in, right? And so that ended up being a section of the book that I think is probably the most powerful one. It's the one chapter, it's the one piece that wasn't in the original Lazy Dungeon Master that I felt was so important that I wanted to write another book to have that in it.
It really took it to another level there.
Yeah, and it turned out that was pretty helpful. And I was glad I made the new book. And but yeah, the idea is what's a one-line clue that the characters can learn in the next game. And I'm not going to bother to say where. And then I do 10 of them a game. And then throughout the game, they can break down a wall and see a mosaic. And the mosaic can tell them something. And so you dole out one of the secrets. Or they pick up an intelligent sword and the intelligent sword says something. Or they find a goblin and the goblin tells them something. So you don't know where they're going to find it. But you've got them ready to go. And it feels magical. It feels
it does.
Players are like, wait a minute, I know you just made that up. And yet you still had a piece of lore that was really important for us. How did that happen? And you're like, because I didn't bother to associate it. Right? I didn't know where you were going to learn it.
I really feel like that sort of idea, specifically in the example you just gave, is a great way to expand on the lore and explorations pillars of the game. Right. Because you have somebody that wants to go actively looking for something and, perception check, you notice some scribblings, they go clean it off, and here's this nice chunk of lore that you've already written that place there because that person wanted to go that way, and it feels rewarding to that lore player or that explorer and stuff. And so that's just such a genius idea.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like I'm not taking credit for it, right? Like,
Right.
I'm sure that this kind of thing has been done before. I know DMs have done this kind of thing before, but sometimes it's just nice to
Have a reminder.
kind of, yeah,
It-
and to
it's
sort of
written there.
articulate it.
It's good for you.
It's good for you. Well, I'm a firm believer that like the steps in return are not the end all be all of game prep steps. It's just one that seems to work for a lot of people, and sometimes
Right.
people just need anything they can grab onto. Like DMs are drowning out there,
Yeah.
and this is one crappy cracked life preserver that they can grab onto and not drown in the craziness of our game. And so,
Oh man.
you know,
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
One thing that really caught my eye was in one of the chapters, you say keeping the end in sight. You mentioned that there's a big problem with character focused open ended stories. They often
Yeah.
fall apart at the end, and
Yep.
even great writers like Stephen King and George
Yeah,
R. R.
Stephen King,
Martin.
Stephen King had happened. Well, George R. R. Martin didn't even finish it, but look, that's a whole other problem.
Yeah, that's a different.
You
that's a
know,
different thing.
where you've got
Yeah.
these stories that are brilliant and thought provoking and unpredictable, yet often kind of just
Yep.
fall apart at the end. Can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about
Sure.
that and why it's important for a lazy
Yeah.
DM?
So there's a lot of really good examples of this, both good and bad, right? And the hard part is that like really interesting stories happen because when we don't know what's going to happen, right? And it's why Game of Thrones was as popular as it is. Like, sure, it's this like hard bark, fantasy adventure with naked people in it, but it also has a story where you're like, wow, they killed the main character off in like halfway through the season. Like, I thought this was the good guy, right? And he got beheaded. Right? He's in prison to be it. Spoiler for Game of Thrones. And but at this point,
It's been so long. Yeah. I think.
and they do it again, right? The Red Wedding and all these different places where they take these hard left turns in the story, and that's what brings people coming back. And when your D&D game goes that way, right, where if you're running a character-driven D&D game where the characters do things and the world reacts to that, and then the characters react to that and the world reacts to that, you don't know where it's going to go. You don't know what's the direction. My main villain in my campaign currently joined a totally different faction and changed the entire course of the campaign. And now the villains are different than they would have been if they'd gone another path, right? I had no idea who the final villain was going to be. And it's very cool. The problem is, what do you do at the end of that, right? So Stephen King's The Stand, another spoiler for The Stand, so be careful. And he talks about this in his book on writing, that he wrote The Stand and he was halfway through it and he wrote like 700 pages or 600 pages. And he's like, I've got like 36 main characters, right? Like, what am I going to do with all these? Like, I don't know what to do. And he's like, I already wrote 600 pages, so I'm not going to throw the story away, but it's a mess. And he went out for a walk and he's like, I'm pretty sure I got the story right. And he's out for a walk and he's like, I'll blow him up. Right. And literally halfway through The Stand, he blows up the room full of characters and like 4 of them survive. And those 4 become the ones that go out through the whole rest of the book, right?
Problem solved.
Problem solved. He
It
blew up a bunch
works.
of characters. Totally changed the course of the book. And it made that book really wild because you're like, oh my God, these main characters die. Like one of the main characters is killed. And so yeah, we love these left turns. But then you get to the ending of The Stand and he's clear. He had no idea what to do. And he's like, I don't know. God comes and fixes it. And you're like, why did all these people cross all of America on foot to go there and get captured so that God can literally bring a hand down and touch a nuclear bomb and blow up Las Vegas? Right? Like, that's the end of The Stand? Right?
It's a letdown.
And it's one of those, spoiler for The Stand, right? But like 1,000 pages of that. And that's the end. You're like, well, the ride was worth it. Like, even though the ending sucked, the ride was worth it.
Yeah.
And boy, like, you want another bad example. So I'll give a good example. A good example is Breaking Bad, right? If you guys have watched the TV show Breaking Bad. So one of the fun things about the TV show Breaking Bad is that Walt, nothing ever goes right for Walt. And he just barely manages to get by, usually by using crazy science for things. So he's trying to become the best meth creator in the world, right? He wants to be the best gangster in the world, but he's a terrible gangster. But he just barely manages to skate by every time, right? And he just manages to figure it, to science his way out of all these problems. And then and things are going bad and good and bad and good. And then at the end, it's like his whole life is falling apart, right? Next thing you know, he's like in Alaska in a cabin, right? And the whole world is looking for him. His brother, he got his brother-in-law killed, his wife, all this terrible stuff. He had to get, he lost all the money he made, right? It's all anywhere. And then they get to the final episode of the series and everything goes right for him. Right. He sticks an M60 in the trunk of a car and sets it up on some kind of automated thing that will shoot. And it only kills the people he needs it to kill. And it doesn't kill any of the people he needs to keep around. Right. It's like the perfect, it's the God in the M60. It just hits the people. So everything goes right for him in only that episode. And it was fine because you're like, I just want a fulfilling ending. Like, I don't need a left turn at the end, right?
And plus, he was getting shafted the entire time, so it's finally something.
So finally something.
Right.
There was actually a really good article that said, I'm pretty sure he died. He froze to death in a car. And that was all his dream about it, because nothing ever goes right for him. And I was like, that's actually a really good thought. Like that. It's all like his idealistic dream sequence. Right. Then you look at Game of Thrones, the TV show.
Yeah.
And they decided in the second to last episode to do another hard left turn. And it ruined the whole series, in my opinion. Right? Like,
generally concede that. Yeah, it ruined the whole
you look at the ratings on IMDb, and it's pretty clear that they were not well loved.
With the Game of Thrones second to last episode, I actually have made the firm argument multiple times, saying actually it's not as hard of a left turn as you think if you watch the seasons leading up to it. The problem though is the last season rushed through everything. It seemed out of nowhere when it really wasn't.
Right.
The hard part, though, it's not necessarily about what you think might happen, but what people want. And taking the strongest female character in the show and turning into just a psychopath in one move is like the most, in my opinion, the most misogynistic take on the story you can make.
Right.
Oh, she's just crazy. Like, come on, really? We're going to take the heroine of the show and say, oh, she's just crazy. Come on.
It's not the best.
Could have been a
better
better
with that though was she was always crazy. You always saw the signs of it, but she always had people to hold her in check. And by the time you hit the episode,
she held back. She never would just murder a bunch of women and children. She never did that. She saved whole cities. Anyway, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, obviously.
We need to
move on.
Scroll past that for now.
All right.
There's somebody that's on the last season is like, I hate you guys.
You spoil it. That was years ago now. And besides, better off not watching them.
You had a whole lot of time to watch that by now.
Anyway, one of the main components for D&D, obviously, is the combat. And arguably, it's one of the biggest time-consuming aspects of the game. What is your tactic for taking on such a important aspect?
So it's interesting. I think that combat has gone down in its importance in D&D with 5th edition over 4th edition. And I've run a couple of polls on this on Facebook and Twitter and gotten more than 1,000, I'm pretty sure more than 1,000 replies on this, where people enjoy role-playing twice as much as they enjoy combat, by and large. And it's not universal, and it's not, it doesn't mean that it's not important at all. But I think it's interesting that when you ask which of the 3 pillars do you enjoy the most, I ran it a couple of times, because I was like, I'm not sure I stated it right. I'm not sure the question is right. Maybe my audience is wrong. I actually, more than other polls that I've run, kind of checked the angles to say, like, is this true?
Is it accurate?
And both times it came out consistent. So one thing that I do, and I was, again, like you guys are talking about, like, I built big set piece battles. I've got an army of Dwarven Forge. I got probably 1,000 miniatures, and I would run these really big, elaborate set piece battles. And now I run maybe a couple of those per campaign, right? It's rare for me to run the big set piece battles like I did. And instead, I bring a list of monsters that I think might show up in a scene. I have a list of interesting locations that the characters could explore. In the back of my head, I've got a few sort of tips or sort of tools for doing ad hoc situational sort of things, like, can you jump up on the wall and get a weird angle on a guy and get advantage on your attack? Or can you push a guy into a big boiling pool of lava? Stuff, I'll sort of keep these in the back of my head so that I can draw them out. But then I largely improvise the battles. And boss fights are different, which is why I wrote, a book with Scott Gray and James Intercasso of 23 boss battles, is because boss battles are hard and we want to make it easier by saying, here are 23 you can drop into your game. And, so they're harder to do, and they still have a place, but I'd say most battles don't. And I had this conversation on my show earlier today about, like, the purpose of a battle, and some believe that the purpose of a battle is to wear down the resources of the characters so that, you know, a boss fight will be hard, for example, I think was what came up. And it's like, I never really think of a battle that way. A battle is something that occurred during the story. And I don't know if it's going to be a battle. And I don't know if it's not going to be. Now, there's generally cases where like, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a battle. You know,
right?
Because especially you know your players, right?
Yeah,
you know.
But there's lots of times they might get past it some other way. They might go invisible and get past it. They might negotiate their way out of it. You know, and we were having one today in my game a few hours ago where they went up against one of the major bosses of the campaign, and they're having a big monologue, and he's like, "I really want to like convince you so that we don't have to fight." Like, you know, he's like, I know you're right. You know, and I know you think you're right, and I know what you're doing is for the right reasons, and I think it's for the right reasons, but you're also making the most devastating weapon that's ever been made, and I can't let you do that. So, you know, spells are gonna fly. Right.
I totally get that. I was never the because I played a lot of 4th edition, so combat was kind of central. So I spent so much time designing the combat and everything, and when I made the transition to 5th edition, I started realizing that I found my games were better when I spent more time trying to develop the characters and the locations than I did the actual combat encounters. Right. For a while there, I was just using like random encounter generators and stuff because I'm like, oh, I need some gnolls. There's a generator, because the amount of time I spent on that was taking away from some of the better aspects of the game. I know when we did we finished Storm King's Thunder last year. That was a big one. It was one of the biggest full-on campaigns we had run, and I had a lot of combat, but it was so sparse, I would say, because the players themselves were less interested in just trying to kill stuff and more interested in why did this break? Why are the giants running free? What can we do to control it? And one of the things, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's a specific scene that I remember when we posed as surprise inspectors.
Yes, that's exactly where I was going with that.
And so for whatever reason, Ian over here, and I'm playing a rogue. He's playing a warlock. Yep. Well, he conjures up, a clipboard with, something to write with, and we're like, we can make this work.
And we pull stealth checks.
Yeah, and so we go in, and of course we meet, the fire giant's son. We were like, oh, hey,
yeah,
how's it going? And well, surprise inspection went by, so we tried to talk.
Was at the forge, right? The forge.
It was at the forge. Yep.
Yeah.
And so we're like, hey, so surprise, we're inspecting the place, and we're trying to be affirmative, because we're surprise inspectors. It's
like
our
OSHA.
job.
We're like OSHA.
We own the place right now.
This forge is clearly not safe.
Yes.
Your giant lava forge is,
It's a little strange here. There's a lot of hazards, and of course he's like,
supposed to be
I'm just gonna I'm going to go talk to my dad about this. And we're like, oh, no, you're not. And so Ian just says banishment. And he banished him. And everyone looked around like,
that's why I'm the surprise inspector.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, my God, what do we do?
But because what made that thing so interesting is back to the on point of the combat avoiding. They avoided a bunch of combat by... Oh, man, because, the ogres are dumb, right? How long would it take to prep all that? Yeah. The ogres are all dumb and stuff, so they're like, oh, this guy's got a clipboard and a pen and thinks he's, So that was where I, as a DM, I could say, oh, they're just going to kill you. But I was like, you know what? They're big and dumb and do what they're told, so how far could it go? I let it go a little farther than I probably should have. That's why you had to banish the guy. But I think that's, to harken back to what you said earlier, part of it is it's coming less about just the outright combat and more about the story being told and the creativeness of the players. And I think that your Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master and the Lazy Dungeon Master really allow a person to focus more on those things that, in my opinion, make the game most fun.
Right. That's the hope.
Right. I know it makes me a better DM because of it. So thank you for that.
Well, yeah, I'm glad it's working. I'm always waiting for somebody like, I tried this. It sucks. Like, it totally doesn't work. And I'm like, yeah, I know.
Waiting for the one time.
Yeah, right. It hasn't. Yeah, you never know. You never know if it's going to turn out. Or I realize like, oh my God, what kind of damage did I do to this game? Like, all these people are doing it wrong. But yeah, there is I think both of the things you talk about it kind of hits on an idea I've talked about before, which is called building situations. That it's not really about building encounter, and you can almost kind of stretch the term encounter to mean situation. But the idea of a situation is like things are happening in a certain place, and you have sort of an idea in your head about here's what would happen with this place if the characters didn't go there. And now that the characters go there, we're going to have to see how the world reacts to that. And the example is like if they're going to break into a manor to go steal something, what's that manor like, and where are the guards, and who's doing what there, and and you kind of describe it to the players. You're talking about Storm King's Thunder. Mm-hmm. So an example is there's that gambling barge, right, in Storm King's Thunder. Mm-hmm. And I forget, it's the one that has like the goose coins or something like that. Yeah. I forget what it is. But
I know what you're talking about, though.
Yeah, and so they knew they knew there was a villain on the barge that had some item that they needed. I don't remember the details. But they're like, we're going to go and we're going to all pretend to be different people. Like some of us will be gamblers, some of us will be servants, some will be guards, but we're all going to get on that boat. And we're all going to our job is to go and steal this thing that we know is down there and that's in the captain's quarters. So we got to figure out how to get out and get to the captain's quarters. So the situation was, we knew that where the boat was, we knew that they were getting on board. We knew that there was a bunch of people gambling on there. And the players had about 80% of the information they needed in order to run this operation. About 20% they didn't know about or was going to change. And they're getting ready and they're halfway through, and the barge pulls up and this beautiful woman gets on board in a blue dress and hair, and one of them goes, "Oh my God, that's Imrith." And they're like, "What?" I'm like, because they knew who the villain was.
Right.
And they're like, "That's an ancient blue dragon who knows us and knows us by sight. And she just came on board the gambling barge to gamble." Right? Like, oh man, like, and they're all thinking like, this is going to be like a nuclear bomb going off in the center of this thing. Like, and so they all had to like, how do we steal this item, not run into her, and not have like this massive fight. And it was this wonderful shift in the situation. And again, I ran that same scene for two different groups, and both of them were just so much fun, and it was fun on my part because I don't know what they're going to do.
Right.
And they're going to come up with creative stuff. These are smart people. Mm-hmm. They're going to come up with creative stuff. And all I have to do is make sure that the world reacts appropriately for what's going on, whether it's combat or whether it's exploration or whether it's role playing, whatever the tillers are, I don't know. And that's the real joy, that idea. They kind of talk about it in the game Dungeon World, like play to see what happens. We don't define what happens ahead of time. We play to see. We're there sitting at the table because we want to see what happens.
Right. Cool. So, I guess finally to segue, got a lot more out of that than I was expecting. But aside from the amazing Dungeon Master advice, you've tossed in some fantastic inspiration in the form of the Lazy Dungeon Master Toolkit. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what its contents are?
Sure. I have my copy right here because oh no, that's the wrong book. Shit. It was there, but
we got it. Yeah,
I got it. Yeah. So that was kind of a not a fluke exactly, but it was a really nice sort of lucky happenstance that I did the Kickstarter for Return. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea if it was going to be popular. Like the Lazy Dungeon Master was selling, and I was actually really worried about breaking that. I was like, I'm really, the sales on it are pretty consistent. And why would I write another book if the old one's still doing well, right? But I was like, yeah, but I got these things that I want to talk about that aren't in it. And so I'm like, and I had already done a couple of Kickstarters, but I hadn't done the Kickstarter for the original Lazy Dungeon Master. So I knew that it sold, but I wasn't sure how popular this other one's going to be.
Right.
So I said, like, it might be like a trade paperback black and white book with probably no art. But if I get enough money, maybe I'll add a little bit of art, or I'll kind of expand it. So I had a pretty good idea of like how I was going to expand it out. I'd already written it. It was just a matter of what the formatting was going to be like.
Right.
And the Kickstarter did really, really well, and way better than I thought it was going to do. And so the stretch goal was going to be like these one-page supplements that are 5th edition specific. So where Return is not really specific to 5th edition D&D.
Right.
The workbook would be, and it would have it was essentially like, what are all the things that you would typically like have on a DM screen, or how would you expand the DM screen to have all the things you need at the table to be able to improvise your game? So it's heavily focused on a lot of random tables. But random tables for like, can I generate a single-use magic item that has one spell that you can use before it's exhausted, right? Sort of like a spell scroll, but it's an item. can you do monuments that have some kind of interesting power, and you can roll like 3 different levels to sort of get the monuments. And the idea is like in a lot of cases it combines like 3 1d20 tables with a d100 table. And when you have a combination of tables like that, they multiply one another, which means you have hundreds of thousands to maybe even millions of potential options as you roll on them.
Quite.
And you can have you can have millions of options on a single page without a computer, right? And that's I like that idea a lot. So I have a lot of those in there. And then the last thing I did, I wrote a book, I don't know, years ago called Fantastic Locations, which was the idea of 20 locations that you could drop into a game that didn't have monsters or stories tied to them already. It was just like, if you wanted to have a crazy old theater, here's a crazy old theater, and then you could sort of drop in people, right? Or if you wanted to have like
just fill it in there,
you can sort of fill it in. So that was the idea. It wasn't terribly popular. It was okay, but I think the biggest problem I had is it didn't have maps, because I wanted to keep it flexible, and you can't be flexible and also have a map. But I think people wanted maps. So in the Lazy DM workbook, again, because the Kickstarter did so well, one of the things we added in was something called Mundane, Sly Flourish's Mundane Locations, which were like non-fantastic locations, sort of the most common locations that you might have in a D&D game. And there are 10 of those. So it's like caves and mines and a docks and a castle. It's all like very, very sort of straightforward places.
Right.
Yeah. But now they have maps, right? So I got maps from a few different cartographers, and I wrote descriptions. So the idea is like, if you need a place to run a game, you can pull out the back of that book, and probably the place you need is in there, and you can run it right out of the book and not need anything. So yeah, the whole goal of that book is to really just make it easier for DMs to be able to improvise their game, beyond even just the prep that you're doing. And it turned out that is the second most popular book I've ever written. Like Return is the most popular, and that book outsells the original Lazy Dungeon Master by a lot. So people really dig it.
Crazy.
Part of it, it's cheap, and it has a focus, and people really dig it. So yeah, it ended up being a really, a really valuable book, and it's all because it was the reward for it was the stretch goal for a Kickstarter. So it wasn't. I hadn't really planned on it. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Wow.
But I use it all the time. Of course, one would hope, right, that I use my own book.
So,
but yeah, I use it, and I like it a lot.
There you go.
Before we finish up with our main topic today, I have one last thing I really spiked my interest in your Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. You talk about conducting GM brain exercises. Can you, for those listening, what kind of exercises are we talking about?
Sure. There's a whole bunch, and I don't remember what I said in the original Lazy Dungeon Master before what I do now. Most of it is just like bathing yourself in fiction, right? There's a lot of it is just you got to sort of build up your big back database full of just stuff, and it's watching movies that you love and watching TV shows. I talk about like try to watch good ones. Like try not to, there's sometimes like Tiger King, probably not the best. But like so go find, I don't know, this probably make a great NPC. So
maybe.
Yeah. So but just trying to, fill your mind with fantasy and science fiction and all the stuff, all the tropes and all the stuff that we would want to run in our game. And then a lot of it is like when you're bored, when you're stuck in line or you're at a meeting or stuck in traffic, and you need something like, think about what your villain is doing. So instead of saying like, what story am I going to run or where's my game going to go, say like, what's my villain up to right now? Right? Like if I have a villain, like what's she doing right now before the characters? And what that ends up doing is it drives the story you're in the story while you're thinking that way. Mm-hmm. And it's going to drive the direction of the story as the momentum from the characters rather than a plot that you wanted.
Right.
So instead of saying like, I really want this to happen, you kind of say like, well, what's this sidekick? The minion sends a sidekick out to go do a thing. Where are they going? What are they doing? So that's like an example brain exercise. Yeah. I'm a real big fan of like listing 10 things. So instead of trying to come up with great big elaborate stuff, say like, what are 10 interesting locations the characters might run into? Like what are 10, if I've got this general area where they are, so my characters are stuck in the Mournland in Eberron,
right.
What are 10 interesting places they might run into in Eberron? or in the Mournland, you know, and you sort of write down a list, and it doesn't have to be filled out. You don't have to have a lot, but it's just enough to kind of push your brain past the first 3 easy ones and past the next 5 hard ones. And now you're really like, those last couple of ones are really hard to come up with, and that's where your brain really goes far.
Those
are examples.
I'm a really big fan of lists because, like, if I'm gonna have my players, they gotta get on a stupid mariner boat to go, you know, across the bay or whatever. I'll make a short list of 10 things that they would find on the boat. Why?
Yeah, perfect.
I don't know. Yep. I'm just like, there's an anchor on the side. There's some half-eaten sandwich or something like that. Just so I find my brain comes up with some weird things, but if somebody asks, I then got like, oh, there's something. This.
That's
or
right.
Even if I don't have the list, I remember some of that stuff. So I'm really a big fan of lists, no matter what it is. Like, you know, if they kill a skeleton, what kind of, you know, things is it going to drop that's not related to its weapon, you know? Maybe it was an old pirate, so it drops an eye patch or something stupid like that, you know?
Right.
Something to kind of reveal a little bit of that lore or story about it that's not really... It's only going to care if you want to care about the lore. It always feels like it adds it to, at least to me. So
I think there's lots of things that DMs can do to sort of keep their brain constantly chewing around this stuff. Yeah. But those are probably good ones.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've talked about this amazing product. Talked about you a lot. Where can they swing by and grab this thing? I mean, or either of them. Yeah,
easiest place. Well, so the book is available on DriveThruRPG and Amazon. It's also available on my website at slyflourish.com. Probably, you know, best place to get a hold of anything that I've done is to go to Sly Flourish.
Yep.
I recently redid the whole homepage so that like basically everything I'm doing is there in one link or another. Problem is there's 80 links on the homepage, but you know, you can there's all the stuff is there, including all of my books and including Return.
Yeah, then definitely they can find you on social media too, right?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, and I'm on all the things, right? I've got a couple of shows that I do on Twitch, and I've got my YouTube channel, and I've got Twitter, and I don't know, probably a handful of other things, Discord, and Patreon, and things like that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, make sure you guys all go check them out. Before we continue into the next segment, we would like to take a moment to hear a word from our sponsor, right, Ian?
Oh, yes. This episode is brought to you by our generous sponsor, Global Press, and their product, Grimoire 2.
Within these dusty pages, uncover the secrets of the world, indeed of the branches of the multiverse. Collected here are an entire lost volumes of esoteric truths, only for you, the Warlock Grimoire 2. Dark revelations and wondrous testimonials of dark fantasy monsters and magic, locales, and lore of Midgard.
The Warlock Grimoire 2 presents the content from the issues 10 through 19 of the Warlock Zion and includes an entire issue's worth of new, never-before-seen lore and game elements, including both the mysteriously desolated Southland city of Iram and the secrets of grandmother herself, Baba Yaga. Uncover the truths of dark fantasy for the Midgard campaign setting or for the worlds of your own creation.
Pretty sure that was Zine, not Zine.
Who cares?
That's what I saw.
All right, so we are going to open with our Unearthed Tips and Tricks video.
Oh, yeah. And now, what you've all been waiting for. Our Unearthed Tips and Tricks segment, where we bring you new and reusable material for both players and DMs.
Wonderful. I'm really excited for our Unearthed Tips and Tricks. Our character concept of the day. I really got to figure out a way to make it so you guys can hear that on this end, because it's so... It went into a video that everyone could see it, but it's my fingers just moving, counting. Our character concept today is a ghostly bargain. This was submitted by our patron, Charles Kuntz.
Name that pops up often.
Yeah, right? Sorry about that. A good scrap gets them a little excited. Your character was just a normal person, such as a farmer or a merchant or some other mundane calling. Stumbling into a graveyard, burial chamber, or some other potential residence of spirits or all things ghostly, your character is overcome with fear after meeting an honorable warrior spirit who seeks retribution for a betrayal during their life, which leads to remorse and regret tying him to the mortal realm. You were promised that in exchange for allowing the spirit to possess you to finish delivering their retribution, you will be granted its service, skills, and powers. What do you guys think about this character concept?
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's
That's it for me. I don't wanna do it. Okay.
I was kind of reminded of, and I don't know if it's just because I just saw the new trailer for the new Shaman King, but where I envision this being like some sort of maybe like a warlock or like a hexblade or something, where your power is coming from an outside source, but now you've kind of created this what could also be almost like a dual personality. I think could be a little bit of fun. What do you think, Mike?
It's interesting. Like, I guess a question I have is, can that fit into was this an NPC or is this a character?
The idea for our character concepts can be either a player or an NPC.
What do you think it is in this circumstance?
Probably a flavor of a player character, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might actually be pretty interesting as an NPC background, right? If you sort of run into this character at different points during this transformation.
Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah, it would be interesting. The problem if you make it a character is, well, there's 4 other characters, and what are they doing while all this is going on?
You're right.
Yeah, well, I imagine this would be more of like a backstory, probably leading up to the character. So now the characters meet at level 1. He's let's say he's becoming a Hexblade Warlock, right?
I was gonna say this fits perfectly well for Warlocks.
Yeah, I would agree because you're getting your power from somewhere else. So when they meet him, maybe he's already undergone that transformation, and occasionally the other personality. The normal guy slips out occasionally. So it seems like a really interesting potential warlock build for me. I think the biggest question is this something that would just be kept for the DM and the player to know and not shared with the other people? Do they know that his power comes from ghostly origins?
Right.
It's interesting. So
I like that.
Yeah. That'll do it for our character concept. Our monster today is brought to you by the legendary Sly Flourish. So, what do you have for us today, boss?
I'm going to cheat and talk not so much about a single monster variant, but as the templates for reskinning monsters. So, one of the most, in my opinion, one of the best tools that a DM has available to them is the ability to reskin a monster. And the concept behind reskinning, if you're not familiar with it, is you take a monster that exists like in the monster manual now, and you just call it something different, or you describe it differently, or you make very small and subtle tweaks to it to have it fit in a different role. And so my favorite monsters, we were talking about Storm King's Thunder before, my favorite monsters to reskin are giants. You could also include like an ogre. If you want lower challenge rating ones, you can get down to ogres and maybe even like an orc or something like that. But the nice thing about the giant stat block is that it is very, very straightforward and simple, yet has a wide range of challenges. So like a hill giant, let's take a look at the hill giant.
Right. Oh, you mean like challenge ratings?
Yeah, its challenge rating varies significantly. So a hill giant is challenge rating 5. It's pretty high, right? But a storm giant is challenge rating, I don't know, a lot. 13, right?
That's a technical rating, a lot.
But it's a strong 13.
Yeah.
Because it attacks twice plus 14 to hit for 30 damage a hit. So it's a 60 damage hit. And it has lightning strike and all these other things. So what's neat about giants is because even the storm giant, which is one of the most complicated, storm giants and cloud giants are pretty complicated. But even there, they are way smaller than like typical challenge 13 monsters, and which makes them really good to reskin. You can just call it something different, right? And you can, like, I've used fire giants before. I had like a barbarian king. And I wanted a really strong barbarian king, and I just made a fire giant and said it's a barbarian king. And
that's awesome.
Its size was normal, but boy, he hit like a freight train. And
Right.
people are like, whoa, like this barbarian king is slamming on me with this sword. He's doing like 40 damage,
That you actually
Yeah.
bring up a great point there, because when you fight a giant, because they're huge, what the players kind of have an expectation. But
Right.
like Ant-Man, if you take all that size and shrink it into a small shape, they're not
Yeah.
going to expect that pain that's going to come from it.
And if you think about it, like if you're going to take an NPC and suddenly turn them into a giant, well, they can drink a potion of fire giant strength, right? And it's like you could have them sort of throw a bottle to the side and then hit you for 28 damage a hit. And they're like, what's that? It's like fire giant strength. Like, oh my God.
Man, that's awesome.
Yeah. So being able to take this range of challenge ratings, anything from a CR5 for a hill giant up to a CR13 for a storm giant, and keeping those like in your back pocket.
Yeah.
We were talking about improvising during the game. When you need monsters that are of that level and you want to reskin something, particularly any kind of humanoid, you can generally take the giant stat blocks, and the ogre stat block is another really good one.
Yeah.
And you can sort of transform them into anything you want.
And you can also enhance that variation by changing their weapon damage type, or maybe they do a different element. Instead of it being a fire giant, it's a necrotic giant element.
Right.
Something as simple as that can really give it
the storm giant works well for that too, because like you could take that lightning and turn it into anything. And suddenly, if you're getting hit for 54 acid damage from the, the acid lord,
I love it.
The acid queen, you're like, what?
Pretty good. I like that.
Can melt your face.
So,
kind of reminds me.
So
of
I really that to me is when we talk about that, prepare to improvise, reskinning and knowing which stat blocks reskin well. It's just such a handy tool.
And you're preaching to the choir. Every episode, our monster variants that I make are always a stat block that exists with some slight changes, and it totally can give it a whole new feel. So I got it. I love it.
Yeah, really powerful.
All right,
it's really good.
I think that'll do it for our monster variant.
Messing with giants.
Yeah, dork with giants. Right.
Cool. So our encounter of the podcast is the Void Maiden. So while the characters are wandering through a dungeon, they come across a particularly strange-looking upright Iron Maiden. A woman with a horrified and tormented look casted upon its front. From the inside the coffin they can hear the screams of someone, or something, begging to be released. Outside the coffin is an impression of a handprint surrounded by runes on its front. With a successful DC 18 Intelligence Arcana check, a character can identify the runes as material components for a teleportation circle. If the character succeeds the check by 5 or higher, they're able to decipher variant markings distorting the spell, making it a one-way trip. If a character places their hand on the handprint impression, the character is zapped away with magic and swaps places with the person inside the Iron Maiden. While inside, the creature requires no food or water to live. Standing in their place is an elderly pale elf named Delsaron Thielen. He has been locked in the Iron Maiden's total darkness for 312 years.
Oh no!
His band of adventurers had entered the dungeon previously, stumbled into this trap. None of his allies could find a way to free him, and none were willing to trade places with him. The magic of the Iron Maiden is treated as a 9th level for purposes of dispel magic or other similar effects. So, stupidly strong. Good luck breaking.
What do you think about this, Mike?
I can't believe it's not a vampire.
Oh!
I was kind of wondering.
Like,
damn, I missed out on that.
I had one like this where 4 sarcophagi with these like husks inside that are still alive and they're begging for help. And the player's like, that's creepy. And they look and like one of them has fangs. They're like, nope. Like, nope, you're staying in the car. We're out. Like, don't look at him. Don't look at him. Right. Like, we're going to charm you.
Oh my gosh.
And so, yeah, that idea, like right out of Interview with a Vampire, right? Of, like, vampires trapped in Iron Maidens that are stuck there for hundreds of years. So
totally didn't even, don't know why didn't think about that. I really like this encounter because the players could choose. I mean, if they're evil, they'll probably be like, F it. But the thing about this character is it can be a good character. It's an adventurer who just got stuck in this thing, and they can help him. They put their hand up, poof, they change places. Now he's free. He's certainly not going to want to go back. So now somebody's stuck in there, or they can choose to bypass it entirely and ignore the pleas and cries. And I really like choices like that. I mean, so what is the solution? I mean, obviously, this short little description doesn't include all possible solutions, aside from it can be dispelled and removed. I mean, maybe a Goliath will just pick up the thing and carry it with them the rest of the time. Who knows? But
I was gonna say, yeah.
I really like encounters like this. It's not a direct combat encounter, but I think it could be a lot of fun in any dungeon, really. So, is there
You
any,
can kind of just throw this anywhere.
what are some other ways that we could make this a little bit more intriguing? You guys got any ideas? Nope.
I didn't hear it.
You didn't hear me?
No, I didn't hear Ian.
It's fine. So I think
Particularly
that'll.
the vampire.
I guess.
aside from making it a vampire, but I mean,
Some other artifact creature too.
Morality
Putting
could
the
be really
gin,
interesting
whatever.
for something that's been away that long.
Yeah.
Like,
And
is it good? Is it bad? Does it have a semblance of the understanding of good and bad?
yeah. I mean,
if it's been in there for 312
Yeah,
years,
it's a long time.
that's a really long time. Technology's probably totally different now.
but it's still an
Yeah.
elf, so I mean that's a normal time. But I like the way Mike's thinking. What if the person isn't just, maybe he's kind of cuckoo, because he's been locked in blackness for 312 years. He comes out, he's all stark white, and I mean it would be
May as well be a vampire.
interesting. Well, like I said, yeah, I mean mine's right, but I think it's an interesting moral thing for the players. What happened to your camera there, Austin?
Oh, the internet here sucks. I
Yeah.
wouldn't worry about it.
Well, you're a big green blob now. All right, I think
Okay.
that'll do it for our encounter of the podcast. Ian, would you like to tell us about our magic
I
item?
will turn off camera.
Our magic item today is the Touched Amulet. It is a wondrous, rare item, and the attunement is required to be done by a tiefling. It's shaped in the likeness of a devil, adorned with infernal etchings. This monstrous amulet is a boon to those with a hellish blood. Just a tiefling, in many cases. The amulet has 3 charges and regains 1d3 expended charges daily at dawn. While you are attuned to this amulet, your blood warms with this infernal power. Spells that use your infernal legacy have their saving throw increased by 1. DC, that is. Additionally, if an enemy damages you with an attack within 60 feet of you, use your reaction to expend 1 charge to cast Hellish Rebuke at its lowest level. Yeah.
Pretty good.
I think a magic item that boosts up a racial ability is always a win in my opinion, and this definitely doesn't.
Yeah,
I agree.
I really liked it because there's nothing worse than running out of spell slots and then not being able to nuke somebody. Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of supposed to be the tiefling's kind of whole shtick, I think. So, what do you think, Mike? You're an
Yeah, it looks
expert
cool
at
to
this
me.
stuff.
No, well, no, I'm not in magic items. Um,
So,
yeah, no, it looks like a fun one to me.
I like the idea of just being able to use something that you clearly picked, like this race or this
Yeah,
class
right.
for,
It's
and being able to
boosting
use
up
it
a thing
more.
that you did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really dig it.
And I mean, anybody that asks, I always like the things that are specific to, because anybody can give you a flaming sword and anybody can use it, but when a Hell-Touched Amulet drops, everyone know who it's for,
Yeah.
it is for.
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, it makes the player feel like their choice and race mattered a little more. And to me, that's something that is always really fun. So, all right, that'll do it for our magic item. Mike, would you like to tell us about our Dungeon Master tip today, Mr. Lazy DM?
Sure, I'm totally gonna riff away from what we talked about before
Do
and
what you
what
gotta
we've got down here. I want to talk about maps.
Okay.
So
Works
maps
for me.
maps are really, we obviously are kind of swimming in maps in all of our games.
Mhm.
But how to use them, and as I was always looking, what's the easiest way to really use maps? And I don't know about you guys, but I've been playing all of my games online recently,
Mhm.
in the last 9 months or so. And I was kind of in love with Dyson Logos maps before. You guys familiar with Dyson Logos?
Hell yeah.
maps? Yeah. So Dyson Logo, if you go to dysonlogo.blog, I think it is, dysonlogos.blog, and you click on maps, you get more than 900 maps that are free and available to use for your D&D game. They're not all commercially usable, but they are certainly usable in your home game. And my thought is like, if you ever thought, I need to sit down and draw a map, the answer is probably you don't, because Dice has probably got a better one available to you right now for just about any situation you need, right?
Yeah, he's got hundreds.
I needed a multi-story ziggurat, and guess what? I found a multi-story ziggurat, right? So whenever you are looking at a location, an easy way to do it is go to DiceandLogos.blog, go to maps, and just start looking through them. And as soon as you find a map that is suitable enough, just copy it, save it, stick it wherever wherever you keep your maps. And something that I was considering, I've been doing for a while and kind of considering today, is like labeling the maps. And I've been kind of messing around with image editors and things like that to drop labels on a map of like what each room is going to be, because the Dyson maps are blank, right? They don't have don't have any annotations. So and what I realized I was doing on my show today is like, I could just make a list of the rooms. I don't need to actually say which room is which part of the map, because I'm looking at the map while I'm writing them down.
Right.
And I know in my head. So it hits this idea of like, when you're doing your preparation, don't do it like you're going to sell it on the DM's Guild, right? Like, you only need it for you. Like, you're the only one that's ever going to look at it. And if you know that this room label is in that room, you're good. You don't have to annotate the map.
Right.
And it just means like, if you need to fill out, I did it on the show, and it's like, if I need 14 rooms and I need to fill them out, I could do it in about 5 minutes, because like, I know that's the guard quarters, that's a guard barracks, those are the guard robes, that's that's where they bathe, that's the room of statues. And then you can kind of add your fantastic-y bits, like that's a statue of Sora Kell, the original leader of the Droam and the revered sort of godlike entity that the daughters of Soraka worship. So you can sort of add your little tips and stuff in there, but you don't have to go through like the painful process of adding labels, unless you've got a system. I have friends that do everything in Roll20, and they will use the Roll20 labels, and it's really easy for them. If it's easy and fast for you, go with the gods.
Oh, for sure.
But if it's not, just write them in a list, and you'll be fine.
Love me some lists.
Yeah, lists are great, and this is just another way. Use the map to inspire your own list of what interesting locations the characters could run into when they're exploring these places.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to
good old maps, man.
Write that
maps.
That's good.
Here's a DM tip from 40 years ago.
Right?
Use maps.
I really like that idea. There was recently a product release I saw a Kickstarter for that did that, where when I don't know if it was Alan Tucker, I don't know who it was, but somebody had a Kickstarter that basically said, hey, we're going to run this thing. We're going to take all these fantastic maps provided by Dice and Logos, and they're going to write adventures based on the visual of the map. And I think that they can be so inspiring. So
yeah, Cobalt Press does this with the Warlock layers.
Yep.
So your sponsor, right? Cobalt Press is a sponsor?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wolfgang Bauer and Cobalt Press.
Oh man.
So they
awesome.
the Warlock layers all use Dice and Logo commercially usable maps, and then you build your adventure around it. One of the ones for Cobalt Press is Apex Emojian. I forget the full name, Legacy of Apex Emojian. And that was one I did, where they had a map, and we were given a map. I was given a map, and then I had to write all the story around it. So that's a great way to go. And I think it's a great way to kind of plan a D&D adventure, is if pick a map and then fill it out.
Yeah, Jeff Stevens did that when we wrote for his Villains in Layers 4. He sent us out maps, and I had to write an encounter around it, and it was really cool. So
I think I have a Jeff Stevens one that I did for him too, where I did that. Where it was, I can't remember if either I gave him. I think in that case he actually put in a map order. Yeah, and who was it that did the map? I forget his name. Really great cartographer. It'll come to me.
Elvin Tower.
Not Elvin Tower.
No, they do really good work.
Yeah, he does. He's great. He did a bunch of the maps.
He's busting out the book. Gonna find out.
Daniel Walthall.
Daniel. I don't know that I've got
Daniel Walthall. He's great. Yeah,
I'll have to add him to
wonderful
my.
maps.
I'm gonna write that down and add that to my.
Yeah,
list.
this is one of his maps, for example.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so he does great. Really, really good.
I'll write that down
map.
when I need some nice maps.
Yeah, like Dyson, he does them all by hand. Yeah. Unlike Dyson, his are.
All right, I think that'll do it for our Dungeon Master tip. Maps, use them for interesting locations. don't have a title for that because we riffed it, but there it is.
Sorry.
No, that's okay, man. It's fine. I like riffed it because that means now I got another one for another episode that I don't got to
There
write
you go.
because it's already done. All right, our player tip of the podcast is don't be a dick. And you can avoid dickitude by mastering that role-playing of an Eladrin. The Eladrin society straddles the boundary between the Feywild and the natural world. Eladrin build their elegant cities and towers in places of striking natural splendor, especially where the veil is thin between worlds. Long-lived and strongly tied to the Feywild, Eladrin have a detached view of the world. They also often have difficulty believing that events in the human world have much importance at all, really. Their general detachment from the world can make an Eladrin seem distant and intimidating to many other races. Their fey nature also makes them simultaneously alluring and a little frightening at times. However, Eladrin take friendship and alliances to heart and can react with swift fury when friends are endangered. They live by a very the Eladrin also live by a very aesthetic philosophy common to the Feywild and personified by Corellin. Is it Corellin or Corellian? Corellin.
I think it's Corellin, yeah.
The god of beauty and patron of the Fey, Eladrin seeks to exemplify grace, skill, and learning in every part of life. From dance and song to swordplay and magic, Eladrin are close cousins to the elves and are occasionally called high elves or even gray elves. The two races hold each other in high regard, and they share a burning hatred for their third branch of the race, the Drow. I love this detail. I pulled this right from one of my 4th edition books because I'm going to be honest, I love 4th edition and I've got to get use out of all my books. So I thought this was a great little snippet about the expectation of the way the Eladrin is expected to behave. Is there anything, what do you guys think about this, or do you have any additional details to enhance to the roleplay of an Eladrin? Teleport a lot.
Yeah.
Which is something I definitely leaned in quite a bit in 4th edition, just because it's like their thing. It's something that differentiates them from other elves, especially when you built them in classes that had other teleport abilities on top of that.
Yeah, I'm a big
the
fan.
The Bath Hexblade I built was really fun to play.
Right. The thing that I think I enjoy, because people often just compare elves and Eladrin, they're the same thing. They're not really.
No.
And
So no.
Honestly, I didn't really think anything about it until I busted out my 4th edition book that had way more interesting stories. But did I miss anything? Anything else to enhance that Eladrin gameplay style?
No, it's pretty cool.
Wonderful.
On top of my head.
You guys make it really easy for me today. Well, that'll do it for our player tip. Don't be a dick. You can avoid dickitude by role-playing an Eladrin. So, before we close out today, we have another fantastic gift to give away. Compliments of our man, Jeff Stevens.
We do. Our giveaway is Scourge of the Nightingale, Part 1, A Song of Love. A masked menace terrifies the region. Adventurers stumble into her scheme, the kidnapping of a famous performer known as the Divan Artist. Their mission is to deliver a ransom and collect Divan. And our winner today is P. Morton 90.
Hey!
Congratulations, AP Morton. If you enjoy the product, please consider leaving a review. One of the best things you can do for a content creator is telling the world how much you love their content. I'm sure Sly or Mike can agree with that. If you didn't win, have no fear. You can head on over to critacademy.com/Jeff Stevens, and there's lots of more fat loot you can pick up for free. So do that.
More.
So before we end our show today, Mike, would you like to give yourself and your content one more plug where people can find you, all that jazz?
Sure. Easiest place to get what I do is over at slyflourish.com.
Awesome.
Nice and easy.
Yeah, I like that.
Try to make it as easy as possible.
There you
Go
go.
there, spend a little time on the site, just explore and grab what you like.
Thankfully, everything's very self-contained over there.
I try to keep it pretty self-contained.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to take a second to thank you for coming on the show. I know you're, based on all the content you put out, you're a very, very busy man. So I appreciate you taking an hour and a half out of your
Happy
day
to do
to
it.
talk
No,
to us.
It's been a lot of fun.
For everyone else, I want to thank everyone else who joined us, and hopefully you all will join us on our next episode. We're going to be discussing Armament Quests. Take a journey to forge weapons of power. I've done this in my games in the past, and I'm excited to write up some fun examples of quests to help the players build their own magic items. I think the example we've used before is a player trying to acquire a pristine ruby that is dipped into lava at the summer solstice, and then attaching it to a hilt, and then bathing the blade in the fire of a red dragon's breath. Quests like that I'm excited to talk more about, so hopefully you'll join us. If you do enjoy the show and you'd like to support us, please visit critacademy.com, follow us on social media, leave us a review, or pick up some of our best-selling content on DM's Guild, on our website, or even on Amazon. All right, that'll do it. I am your host, Justin.
And I'm Mike Shea.
And I'm your co-host, Austin.
I'm your co-host, Ian. Thanks for listening.
Keep your blades sharp and spells prepared, heroes. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today.